Welcome everybody to SlipAngle Show. I'm Abe Schmucker, and today I'm here with Apex Pro's Andrew Rains. That was my best Austin Cabot.
Hey, Austin Cabot, how's it going?
I'm impersonating Austin. If you're listening, we love you, and we would like you back on the show sometimes, or all the time. I think Austin's busy right now selling airplanes, which sounds fun.
That does sound fun.
Andrew, what's up? We're doing something new today.
Yeah, this is new. I like the format, but a lot of things are up. But I was thoroughly impressed with your introduction. I've
heard it a few times, and I thought about just grabbing the audio and like putting it on the front of the show, but I would have to do the introduction myself for like who the guest is, and I think that would sound weird. So I'll just pretend to be Austin.
I thought that was perfect. I literally thought I was listening to Austin Cabot. So I'd love to hear Austin back on the show sometime. I have a lot of that nostalgia for those early SlipAngle episodes.
You know, it's funny. We just released episode 400. I think that was on Tuesday, and my first appearance on the SlipAngle show was episode 100. So I've been around for the majority of SlipAngle, which feels weird to me.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't think about it that way, but I guess that is the case.
Well, it's weird because I kind of still see it as like Adam and Austin's podcast, but I've been around a little while, so I think it's partly mine too.
I think so. I'm just honored to be here.
Well, thank you. We love having you on the show, and I like your thoughtful approach to the things that you do. We just got back from NCM Motorsports Park about a week and a half ago, I guess. And you raced GLTC. You had your squad with you, which was cool to get to meet all those guys. And you were singing some loud karaoke on Saturday night. Tell me about your weekend.
That is in fact true. Yeah. We had quite the squad rolling in there. It was like, it was pretty cool. Once, I guess people realize you're going to do something really fun and you're excited about it, and everybody just kind of jumps in and commits. So we had a big crowd with us, which made it really fun. I probably, just having that many people, and I'm a big social person. I like being around a lot of people, and so COVID's been kind of like a challenging time for me to like find my source of energy. So taking all these people to this event really motivated me to, prep the car properly and focus on everything. So I spent a lot more time than I have previously with Mitch Cobb working on the car and making sure that it's as competitive as it can be, which we felt pretty good about. NCM's a really challenging racetrack, and I knew going into it that I wasn't probably going to feel like I got everything out of it just because of the nuance of it. Unlike NOLA, which is like a very simple track layout to learn, I felt at least. Going down to NOLA, Abe was like, after qualifying, I was like, well, holy shit, I got everything out of the car. There's nothing left. Like, if I'd gotten more out of the car, I would have been in the wall.
Right.
And I didn't never feel that way at NCM because there was a lot of, every corner I'm going through, I'm like, was my turn in right? Did I get to power soon? There was a lot more questioning.
Well, I remember talking with you a little bit after the event, and in general, I think you're a guy that's pretty confident in your driving ability. You get to drive a lot of really fast cars in places that you've driven before. And something that stood out to me about your experience at NCM was just how disappointed is maybe the wrong word, but like you were frustrated that you didn't feel like you got everything. And I think it's a testament to the challenge of being really quick on that track. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's a track that haven't driven a lot of tracks. There's not a lot of like similar corners from other racetracks that I could kind of pull out of my memory bank and kind of put the piece together for that track. And I think particularly the visual cues are more ambiguous there than other places. Like, because the walls line the whole track, and because a lot of the topography is similar in certain places, like the way you approach certain corners, the track's going uphill or downhill or whatever, and it looks the same somewhere else. I think those make it so that it requires a little more repetition than most tracks to get some visual confidence down. And I think that's what I really struggled with, was just not necessarily, like, it is a high risk track. It is kind of sketchy in some ways, but that's not what prevented me from driving the car the way I wanted to, or getting everything out of the car. It was really like the visual ambiguity of like, I think this is where I look here, but I still don't have the rhythm down for that yet. And
Sure.
I know there's people listening, and certainly most people that I've talked to since then, that understand that our car is not nearly an optimized GLTC car. It's very, very far from that. And I had a couple of, someone actually reached out to me on Instagram and just said, I love watching you race, because it's like, I can tell that you're driving the car for everything that it's worth. And I'm seeing people make comments like this, and I know that I probably had a second of race pace, in my back pocket, just knowing the track better.
Adam and I were talking, we recorded a show last night, and Adam and I were talking about the speed of GLTC cars at NCM. And if you compare them to the time attack cars that are kind of in the different classes throughout the field, maybe with the exception of Club TR, which I think is analogous or shares philosophy with GLTC, cars in even street class make speed so differently. That said, Andy's 212.8 in a GLTC spec car is an insane pace for qualifying. And when you think about those cars make, 200 or 220 horsepower, going that fast at NCM is absolutely bonkers. And it means that those cars are making speed in every corner around the track because they don't have any horsepower to make it on the straights. And so like the people who are running competitively, even in mid-pack in GLTC, are driving really well and very fast. So what, in terms of race pace, where were you running consistently?
I pretty consistently each race, I think except for maybe race 4, was running in like a 217 race pace.
Okay.
Not the first lap when you're in heavy traffic. And then in race 1, I had some contacts. Eric Meadows spun rather dramatically right in front of me, and I touched him, and it bent my fender. I just posted this on the GLTC page. You can see it in the video, but it bent my front fender into the tire. And every time I turned to the right, you could hear the tire rub, and it would get worse and worse and worse the more I turned the wheel. And I think we were in like,
well, those things are self-clearancing now though. So,
right. So, and I'm glad I took the approach that I took was I'm going to try to back off my pace as much as I can in the right-handers to let it self-clearance before I ask a lot of like a right-hand turn and load the tire and but I had like 3 cars right behind me. And so I backed off to like a 220 pace just so that I didn't go into turn 5, which is 108 mile an hour minimum speed in our car, and turn the wheel and have it pop the tire.
108 is the minimum speed.
That's the slowest that you go in that
corner. That's banging.
Yeah, that was,
holy cow.
It's very fast. And it's actually quite comfortable, particularly, and I think that's our car's strength is the composure at high speed. It struggles a lot in the transients because I think a lot of it is the 150 pounds of ballast that we're carrying.
Oh, sure.
But it's a higher center of gravity car. So compared to like an S2000 or a K Miata or a MX-5, and it just doesn't change direction quite as authoritatively. You have to convince it a lot more. You have to like really work your feet in the wheel to get it to turn. But it has an advantage certainly in the composed kind of steady state, long, high speed corners. And then it also should have an advantage on the straightaways based on our power to weight. We're a higher horsepower car compared to, we're 20 horsepower more than most people. We're 225, but we have a factory gearing in the car, which is really, really tall. So I never got out of 4th gear at NCM. So while I'm like upshifting 1 gear on the straightaway, the car next to me is always grabbing 2.
Sure.
And
so does that mean like throughout the track, you're predominantly just in 3rd and 4th gear?
The entire track. Yeah. Except for turn 10, I went to 2nd, but
okay.
Yeah, 3rd and 4th everywhere, which it mitigates some opportunity for mistakes, per se, but shifting has never been a crutch of mine. Shifting's always been something that I don't make a lot of shifting mistakes just because I've made it a focus point early in my driving to build the muscle memory for it. But where it really hurts you is that you really have to get the car wound up for a fast lap. Like 1 mile per hour slow in the middle of a corner, I would argue hurts our car more than a car with more optimized gearing, just because you're further out of the power. And I think that's, the more that I think about it, the more that I think that is the biggest change that would help the car the most and help me get more out of the car more consistently. I had Tom O'Gorman drive the car on Friday and give me some feedback because he's got intimate knowledge at NCM, right? He's driven a whole bunch of stuff. I've been there when he freaking waxed everybody at Time Trial Nationals. I don't remember if he won overall or not, but he was in like a Camaro SS.
I remember. I think he did like a 212 or a 213 in that car.
Yeah, it was properly fast on street tires, in essentially a stock car, and probably the lowest horsepower car that was doing those times. So he helped me a lot, and I got a lot of confidence from hearing his feedback on the car, because even though he blew my times out of the water, which I knew he would, just because that track is like, anybody listening to this will agree. If you're slow at NCM, you're like 3 or 4 seconds off the pace many times. Like,
sure,
that's because of the compounding effect of how many turns it has. It just creates that kind of gap. Whereas at a track like Barber or Gingerman, if you're, a half second to a second slow, that's a big gap. At NCM, that's a tight gap, right? So I learned a lot from him on Friday, and I found almost 2 seconds from my best time on Friday. On Saturday, I still wasn't as fast as Tom. I got close to his average pace and my race pace. I would say I wasn't far off. I got a lot more confident that I was getting a lot more out of the car, but when I reflect on it, the gearing really hurts a lot more than I maybe initially thought at NCM.
Not that you're jumping right into that, but are there options that are easy for you if you were interested in making changes?
Yeah, there are it's actually really easy in the BMW world. You just need a new ring and pinion, and the diff it's an hour job to pull the diff out. And then we've already taken it apart. It would not be a barrier at all. Like labor wise, it's very, very simple. But the challenge is the good gear ratios that you want, like it's a 323 right now. If you want a 346 or a 364, which are the two most popular options for the 5-speed gearboxes, those are $3,000.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, they're factory gearing options, but they came in like a Z3 automatic.
Okay.
In like 1 year. So all the racers have already like cherry picked all of those out of the junkyards. So like 6 years ago, they were probably $100.
But now, it's the racers, one of the racers' dilemmas, I think, in that people gravitate towards specific or like particular options because they're cost effective and they work. But like you start taking enough of those, they become a lot less cost effective.
Yeah.
Right. Like, what do you think? The Ford 88 is probably going to become expensive at some point because everyone will want one for their rear diff.
Yep, absolutely. Because people find out the ideal, usually when you're looking at like a non-changeable kind of gear ratio like that, where you're putting in one rear end and you're leaving it for most of the season. In most cases, like, that there's one that you want. And in the BMW world, the 346 is super popular. And that'd make an enormous difference for our car to go from a 323 to a 346. But we're thinking right now, since we run the car in endurance racing, the 323 is really not ideal for anything, but it works for enduros because you shift less, use a little less fuel. Maybe, it's a little bit better package for that if you want to go to VIR or Daytona, because you're going to need a lot of gearing. But if we do any more GLTC, I might end up just like saving up and buying a different diff with way shorter ratio.
Yep.
Yeah, like a 373 or something that would only give me 130 miles an hour.
Well, practically, I kind of feel bad for you in that I think that you have the GLTC bug. And you're kind of in it now, and there's no turning back.
it's a slippery slope. I mean, what's funny is that Mitch Cobb, who works on the car, he's we've talked about him before, but he's a restoration specialist at the Barber Museum. And so he's got his hands in all the classic Formula One cars that they have. He mostly restores the motorcycles in the museum's collection, but he grew up as a racer. He's as much or more of a racer than I am. So every time we're working on something, he's the one that's really pushing the development agenda. He's like, hey, we could do this. We could do this. We could do this. And he backs up his suggestions though with work, which I love. Cause like we're kind of working together towards a mutual goal that we both really enjoy and have a lot of fun in. And so most of the stuff we've done on the car hasn't cost us anything. It's just been like, hey, we can do a little more with the splitter. We can do a little, like we can buy a sway bar and test it. We can, kind of massage the car. And it's I think it just goes to show like we put zero effort into the car for NOLA, literally changed the fluids, made sure all the bolts were tight and went to NOLA and kind of exceeded expectations, mostly because it was a small field, new track for everybody.
Yep.
We were way under tired, but kind of made it work. And then we knew coming up to the NCM, this is going to be all the GLTC regulars. This is going to be way more of who GLTC really is. So I expected to be fighting outside of the top 10, which was where we were, 9th and 10th the whole weekend. And so it didn't not meet expectations, but like you said, I wasn't disappointed with my driving, but it was hard for me knowing I'm not getting everything out of the car and knowing that it's a function of just like, I need to sleep on this track more. Like I literally just need to drive it and sleep on it. I know where the opportunity is in the data. I know exactly where it is. It's all the slow speed corners. That is where I am losing time compared to Tom.
Sure.
Every slow speed corner.
Because presumably you had an Apex Pro in the car when he went out and drove.
Exactly. Yeah, I did. So I learned a lot.
I will say, Brandon Ranvek has that E36 with an S54, which I think is just a wonderful car. That car is so fast and it's so reliable that it seems like he honestly has the most fun when he takes it to an event. And it's really fast now. And he won the street class time attack by a couple of seconds. But I had looked at his aim data, and so I got to see the speed distance trace. And then I asked Patrick Daugherty for his, and he sent it to me from his Apex Pro. And frustratingly, I kind of had to jump back between looking at a picture and like analyzing data in the Apex Pro app. But the cars were different in pace by about 6 seconds, which is a lot. But it was fun to be able to see like, okay, well, these two cars are very different and they're both being driven really, really well. Where is the time to be had? And the things that Brandon's car had done so well was just like all the cornering stuff, because the car doesn't make power. You could tell that it was just lighter and it had more tire, right? Like, I was talking with Patrick's and it was like, if you put a 275 on the front, maybe you get a little bit more here, and maybe you can increase your min corner speed by 1 or 2 miles per hour in this area. And those are the bits that on a track with 20 something turns, they add up real quick.
It's a weird track to find, like in Tom and I's data, there's not a lot of significant gaps in the speed trace. And there's really only one, which for me is turn 10. I sucked at turn 10.
That's
the slow corner.
The really slow corner. Yep.
Yeah. Like sub 40 mile per hour min speed. And it was usually because I was overemphasizing the exit, and I let the car slow too much on entry and gave up a little bit of minimum corner speed. And there's some laps where I did it well. On my fastest lap, I gave up a lot of time there, and the fastest lap would have been way faster. And I know better than that, but on my fastest lap, I was faster than Tom in turn 5. Like I gained a pretty significant amount of time, like 3/10 over him on the gain loss through the turn 5 complex, which is the fastest corner on the track. So it's really weird to see that, but then to see how much of a gap Tom pulls from me out of 10 through deception down the straightaway, right, is like the better part of the second. It's like 6/10.
Yeah, that's a lot to give up.
Yeah, and it was just that track is one of those that, like, I don't drive a lot of tracks that have that like turning your head way over your shoulder, like letting the car rotate all the way through this super patient, long release off the brake pedal and then go kind of corner. And I just didn't rotate the car as efficiently. I let the car slow too much. And it made, not only did I overslow the car at the like slowest part of the corner, and therefore even though I got to power a very similar location to Tom, it didn't mean as much, right? Because again, gear ratios, it's got tall ratios, and so you fall a lot of RPM with a small amount of speed change.
Well, and that stretch following 10, I guess up into 15 and 16, with the exception of Deception. I mean, you're talking about going from from like 40 miles an hour. In a fast car, you might be going like 140 miles an hour once you get to 15. And so like, it's a really long time for acceleration. That's broken up a little bit by Deception, but like that's, if you're overslowing at the beginning of that stretch, it accumulates a lot, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, going back, it's not an excuse. It's just like the reality. I think that the car would be easier to drive faster with the tighter ratio gearbox, tighter ratio rear end, because that gap that I had to Tom there would have been less significant if the car was pulling harder immediately out of the corner. Whereas for me, sure, the acceleration was a lot more diminished than it was for him, because he was able to carry that, extra cornering speed. And when I go look at my data, I can see the red Apex Pro lights as I'm trailing off the brake and overslowing the car into turn 10, meaning I'm just not optimizing my use of the tire as I roll in. So not only was he on the power at the same point, but 3, 4, 5 on some laps, 5 miles per hour faster than me at the apex of 10 on my qualifying lap, best lap to best lap.
5 miles an hour?
Yeah, that was just on my best lap. So that was like, on my best lap in my head, I'm like, I'm going to get a good exit, right? I'm going to get a good exit. And then I overslowed 5 miles per hour, which
that's crazy.
33 to 38 miles per hour is the difference. But on like the very next lap, I'm at 38.
Got it.
The difference is much less, but it was that one lap where it would have made the biggest difference. My qualifying lap would have been way better, but it's just very frustrating because there's no risk involved in that corner. There's all the high risk corners. I almost in 15, I was like 1 mile per hour slower than Tom. In 5, I was faster than Tom. And those are the two high risk fast corners, but the car was easier to drive there. Car's way more composed. Like I sent it into 15 one lap in the last race, and the thing
that's such a gnarly corner too. Your approach on that. Obviously you have a car that's different in horsepower and traction than what I used to drive. I mean, when you approach that corner, what's going through your head, and like, what are you thinking about doing? What are the steps mechanically as you work through it?
That's a good question. The big thing is get the vision right first, right? Look discerningly to your turn-in point, and then a very precise point where you want the car to be close to the inside of the track. And if I do those things, then I know my vision's in the right place. And then the next thought is balance. And I think the biggest mistake that a lot of people make in fast corners is the throttle's your friend most of the time in a high-speed corner. So when people make mistakes, it's because they either didn't go back to power soon enough or they overbraked. So it's very easy to overslow a fast corner by staying on the brake too long.
Right.
And putting too much weight on the nose. So the next thing that I'm thinking is it's hard, especially 15, because you have to brake in 15.
And it's a turn, right? And so that was kind of the direction I wanted to go down was, as you entered that turn, did you find yourself trying to do the majority of the braking you had to do just completely straight with the wheels straight? Or were you trying to give a little turn input and also do some braking in order to set the car up on the inside of the corner?
I'm braking as I turn there only because I trust my own skill, and I trust the chassis because it's a longer wheelbase car. So in 15, you kind of have this funky entry where you're kind of jogging the car to the left, and then you're turning uphill to the right. And as it crests, you're kind of coming off the brake. So I'm trying to be off the brake by the time the track crests and kind of loses grip. And then you're maybe holding zero input on the pedals for just a second because you're at a lot of lateral G, and then you're back to the gas pedal. But you can brake and turn there. You just have to be really, you can't brake too much is the key. Like it's hard because it's a very compressed braking zone. Like you don't have to brake. You don't want to brake early because you want to carry your maximum, your Vmax as long as possible.
What,
right?
To interject, what was your Vmax right in that area for GLTC context?
120 miles an hour.
Okay. So if that corner is 100+ mile per hour corner, the amount of brake you actually need is not very much.
Yes. Hold on, let me look. I'll tell you exactly. I'll look at the data.
If only you could put it on the screen.
I can, actually. Let me do that real quick. I'm going to go to Wi-Fi. So 5 is the really fast right-hand sweeper. And for that corner, I'm not braking at all. I think most of the faster cars in the GLTC field aren't, at least no one that I was behind was.
Do you have to lift?
Yes, you definitely have to lift. You could probably go through there flat.
If you did, it might cost you in composure on its way into 6.
Yeah, you're going to be in the wrong place for 6, and you're not going to gain any lap time because the car is going so fast. As soon as you turn the wheel there, the car's slowing down. Even if you're on the gas, it's going to slow down. So you're just going to be fighting the balance of the car there. So you just have to be smart about how you speed check in turn 5. But 15 is different. 15 is a braking zone. And 15 is, I find, a lot more challenging. I also did really well in 15. Can you see the screen?
I can see your iPhone screen. Yes.
Look at that. Look how convenient. So I've got long G selected here on the top screen. So you're going to see values that represent longitudinal acceleration. And then I'll look at my fast lap. So the official Apex Pro time is a 2:17.1. The official timing for the track timing was like a 2:16.8 or something like that, 2:16.9.
Interesting.
Due to the start finish, I'm sure there's just a different location for the start finish. But the reason that see where it is right here on Apex, it's just past this is the actual start finish. And the Apex Pro one's past it, basically because I try not to position them right next to buildings, because there's going to be certain times of the day where there's going to be a satellite on the other side of that building that's not going to get your position.
Gotcha.
But the reason my time is slower here is because I was probably still accelerating when I crossed the timing stripe for the official, timing.
Right.
Whereas I'm braking as I cross it. So if you wanted to gain your lap time for the Apex Pro start finish, you can. You could just blow turn 1 and not brake until you pass the Apex timing stripe. But of course, you're not going to do that. So let's look at speed. This is turn 5. That's like the fast right-hand sweeper.
It looks like your screen isn't updating, at least on my end.
Yeah, it does that from time to time. Hold on. Sometimes it just lags and then it'll catch back up. It's just because it's airplaying over a Wi-Fi connection.
Nah, man, you gotta plug that in with USB. It's so much better.
Yeah, I've done that before and had the same result, but I can try. You want to do that?
Yeah, we're working on things here, figuring it out in real time. Thank you for listening to the show and doing, I guess, a visual SlipAngle here, which might be new for us.
So the funny thing is that I do webinars that people pay for with this exact format that we're doing right now, Zoom and airplaying from my app. Usually works just fine. So it's just a random. How does it work now?
I'm a big proponent of wired connections whenever possible. I realize that when I'm just browsing the internet from my phone on my couch, that's different. But we have absolutely wicked internet service at my house. And so being wired to me is always better.
Yeah, I run Ethernet here. So
same.
Are you seeing my screen now?
It says you are starting with screen sharing. So I would imagine it'll pop up here in just a second.
Yeah. So the usual problem that I have when I plug in the USB cable is that it just the screen never appears. So,
well, we could be experiencing that. So
yeah. And then when I use AirPlay, it works perfectly. until it doesn't. So
that sounds right.
Yeah. It's a little sketchy, but I can look at my data and kind of talk through it, because so turn 5 was the turn I was saying where there's not a brake. It's just kind of a slow lift off the throttle. And sometimes it's like a lift before you turn in. Eventually throughout the weekend, I was actually like turning in and then kind of like creeping out of the throttle. I tried that a couple of times, which sometimes made the car like a little too busy, little over rotation. But on some laps, like this lap, my minimum speed is 108.5 miles an hour, 108.5.
So fast.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then on my qualifying lap, my min speed is 107.
Okay.
So it's somewhere in that range, but it's hard to tell. It's a funny corner because these fast corners are the way you find time's totally different depending on what corner's next. So in turn 5, you have a turn immediately after it that requires you to be track left, hard braking. There's no real time to accelerate from the slowest part of turn 5 until your braking zone. So you really don't want to accelerate out of the corner almost. You'd almost rather enter with too much speed and it's like bleed it off slowly throughout the corner.
Sure.
And so if I could get the screen to share, I can show you like the different approach.
Let's try the AirPlay one more time. We'll see if that works.
Okay. I'm going to stop share. Make sure my Wi-Fi is on. You should see my computer and how much stuff I have plugged into it because I do this type of thing all the time.
You know, I've had iMacs at my residence or use as my main computer for like my home life since I think 2009. And the new iMacs just got released, and I expect that I'm going to order one tomorrow. I have a friend who's a display engineer at Apple, and he's like, hey, if you ever want a friend discount, like we can do that. No big deal. So I may order one because I think the new ones are neat.
Nice. Yeah, I'm a big fan. So I've got 2 laps displayed here.
Sure.
And let's see, the red lap is my best lap from the whole weekend, which was my qualifying lap. And the blue lap is one of my other qualifying laps. It was like 0.3 slower. But where I have the crosshairs right now, right here, you can see the dots on the little track map. That's turn 5. And let me move the crosshairs away so we can kind of look at it. But you see the blue lap, how I'm like bleeding off speed as I enter the corner.
Yep.
But then you have this little moment, something happens here, right?
Yep.
You're like, whoa, way too fast, right? And I'm probably going back to power right where my mouse is right now. And then I realize if I go back to power there, I'm going to be in the wrong place for the braking zone to 6. So I just get back out of it. And I kind of coast, for lack of a better term, until I brake for 6. The red lap, I go in, I speed check a little earlier. I have the same approach where I'm not braking at all. I'm coming off the gas as I enter the corner. And then I squeeze back to power and I go back to full throttle for like a little burst of full throttle and then brake.
So if you select over to gain loss, what's the difference in the approach there at the same spot?
It's almost, so here I'll start at the beginning of turn 5, which is right here, where the gain loss value is negative 0.48. And then I'll move over to the end of turn 5 to the braking zone for 6, which is right here.
Yep.
And the gain loss value is negative 0.49.
So basically no change. 2 completely different approaches to the lap, and there's no difference in time. But I imagine on the blue trace, the oh crap moment too fast was unnerving.
You don't want to do that every lap. Yeah, it's distracting. And I won't say that, I don't want to sound like like you said, I drive a lot. So there's very few moments, even when I have like an oh shit moment, right? It's not as much like oh shit as it is like, oh, that wasn't optimal. Like,
sure,
that didn't help me. Why am I taking that much risk if it doesn't help me? If it does help, then you're kind of like, well, I guess I got to nut up and do
I
this.
guess I got to do this. We're doing it.
All right. So that lap, I was probably on my next lap. I was probably like, ooh, okay, give up a little bit more, just a little bit. But yeah, the net result is 1/100th of a second difference between those two. But the minimum speed difference is also pretty negligible. Like right here is the min speed. And the difference is, I think it might be a little bit later. Right. That's the min speed on the red lap, 1:07.1. And then the min speed on the blue lap, I think, is like right here, 1:08.7.
So I think from here, the natural next question is, can you take your best lap and superimpose it on Tom's?
I can. I don't know if I'm open for that much public embarrassment. No, not really.
We're all looking to improve here.
So Tom and actually Tom and I were discussing how we should have a conversation about this, because it's not super often that you get two guys who spend a lot of time driving other people's cars, doing the kind of work that we do for a living, driving the same car. But Tom and I were like kind of together when we were doing World Challenge to some extent. I was actually in the faster class when I met him. He was in TCB, and then he obviously got some great opportunities, and because he absolutely deserves great opportunities. But he came from a totally different background than I did.
Sure.
And kind of progressed and worked through his professional world. And I went into starting the business, driving for Porsche, doing the instruction. And so there's no bones about, like, Tom is a faster driver. 9 days out of 10, Tom's going to be faster than me. Right. If you were to put us both in like Porsche school cars at Barber, I can probably get him, because I've done that a time or two.
Because you've driven Barber a million times.
It's a possibility. But at NCM, like, I knew, based on the lap times I was running Friday, I was like, oh man, Tom's going to get in this car and run so much faster than me. It's going to be absurd. So I told him, like, I need to know the relative pace of the car to the field, what I should expect. And I also want to know, like, what a reasonable race pace lap is, because that's going to be way different, particularly at NCM, than a qualifying lap.
So I want to share with you something that I was thinking about, and I talked on the show last night with Adam. You know that we run and maintain TrackTune.com, which isn't necessarily meant to be a site driven by like clicks for entertainment, as much as it is building a repository of like reference information to be like filling a gap that exists, at least in part, because people don't use forums all that much anymore. But like, I wanted TrackTune to just be a place where you could go look something up, and it might be as relevant today as it was 5 years ago. Last night, Adam and I were talking about how interested we would be in taking these, if people were willing to submit their Apex Pro data files from, good drivers having done really good laps at a particular track, just like making them available on the data section of the TrackTune website, where if you have an Apex Pro, you can, go grab Patrick Daugherty's lap from NCM in his stock Civic Type R and have a basis for comparison before you go to the track.
Yeah.
Because I think people often watch videos to try and learn how to do stuff, but there's a lot of information buried in the speed distance trace
For sure.
that can help you figure out how to approach a track before you get there.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I love that idea, because that would have helped me. Like, I did get data because I have that opportunity. I got data from some other drivers, but no one in GLTC. I got some Spec E46 data. So I had like some idea, but that's a different tire than my car. That's no aero, totally different. Had I had Tom's data from any similar GLTC car, I would have had a reference or somebody's data that I respect to like go into it. Because with the video, so this is really interesting. I'll show. We'll reveal how much faster Tom went than me, because it's. I want to say it's mind blowing. I kind of expected it. At most other tracks, it would probably be like a half-second gap because of the nature of the track. But
Got it.
My first time at NCM, Tom's however many millionth lap at NCM, right? Tom's naturally going to send it a little more And that's what I wanted him to do. And that's what he did. But if you take our videos, so just remember this as we kind of talk about how different the laps actually are. If you look at just our GoPro video with no data overlay, they look like the same lap.
Interesting.
Like there's you can pick up some nuance. Obviously, if you really look into it and you listen really hard, you can be like, oh, he's got a little more RPM when he exits that corner, or his hands move faster here, or whatever. But as far as like the speeds, even some of the car placement, you're like, I'm watching the same video, right? Like I watch them back to back and I'm like, well, what did I learn there? Nothing. Like Tom was using this curve that I wasn't. Cool. Like that was essentially the value of the video in that particular instance. So where the data became really valuable is now I'm looking at the data in detail and then going back to the video and I'm going, oh, that's how small of a difference that is.
And this is how it adds up
to go faster. Yeah. So let's look at, first of all, we'll just look at macro. So Tom did a 14.8 in my car.
Okay.
And ignore the Apex scores that because we're still beta testing technically the Gen 2 Apex Pro.
Introduction.
Yeah.
Well, if you're still listening to this show or watching this show on YouTube, we're going to spend some time talking about this new introduction here once we get through this data analysis brief.
Yeah, we'll jump into that. So I let the Apex Pro basically die to see how long the battery life would last. And so I took it into the day with like 30% battery on it. And Tom's session was the second to last on Friday. So it lasted until like 3:30 before I had to charge it again. It never actually died on me, which is kind of cool. So that's why the Apex scores are wonky. But Tom's flyer, I believe he actually went out before this. And I'm sure he's listening to this and he could actually correct me, but I was actually in the same session in Bill Griffin's car. So I don't have any context for it, but I think he went out and did a couple laps before this session because there was a black flag or something. And then he went out and his first lap was this 15.8 and then he did a 14.8. And his commentary to me afterwards was, hey, I did a sub 15. It won't do that 2 laps in a row. Like that's not going to be possible. And that's what I asked him to do. I'm like, okay, that's great. And he said, I also don't think you'll probably do 15s in a race. He's like, a 16 would be a fast race pace in this car. So that was my goal for the weekend. I never got there. I never did a 16 in race pace, but I did a 16 in qualifying if you want to go off of the timing and scoring. So the gap between us, he did a 14.8. I did a 17.1 on the Apex data, at least. So it's pretty significant, right? That's like doing mental math. That's like that's like 2.1 or 2 seconds.
Okay.
So the last time I was 2 seconds slower than somebody in the same car was probably 2011. It's been forever. So that was very humbling for me. But what's even more interesting, obviously, is when you jump into the data. So we'll make Tom's fastest lap. And this I don't want to say it is not a fair comparison. I ended up looking at his 15.8 lap more because that was a more realistic lap for me.
I see.
I knew that, like, okay, I'm probably not, like, I don't have the familiarity with this track. I don't have the confidence in my ability on the new tire. I've never driven this tire before, the R7. I'm probably not going to get there this weekend. So I looked at his 15.8 lap, which is something I would recommend doing if you're reviewing data in general. Don't just look at fastest lap to fastest lap, because you're going to see isolated moments that you're not going to want to replicate, especially on like a really, really fast lap.
Sure.
But you also want to look for like consistencies and stuff. So I'll be red. So Tom's blue, Andrew's red. And we'll just look at the speed trace for now. So again, if you're looking at the video, you are like, I'm pretty sure that this is the same lap.
Well, it's certainly on the accelerations coming, out of 3 into 5. I mean, those are identical.
Yeah, it's right on top of each other. And then you see the gap. So can you see my mouse on the screen?
I can.
So the first places I go when I'm overlaying are I look for the gaps in the speed trace, right?
Sure.
So here I go there right away because I'm expecting, so I'll kind of walk you through like my lens when I'm looking at this at the track.
Absolutely.
And I'm going 5 and 15 are the 2 fastest corners on the track. I know I'm leaving something on the table there. I just know it, right? And so after qualifying, I'm looking at our data, and remember, I'm red, right?
Sure.
So now I'm not looking anywhere else yet because I have this preconceived idea that
Right.
that's where I'm leaving time on the table, right? And then I go to 16, which is right here. I'm sorry,
And
no, that's yeah, that is 16.
Yeah, and you're still looking strong there.
Right. I give up a little bit on the entry maybe, but I see he has this moment, as we'll call it, right? He turned in with too much speed here and had to come back out of it, and I got on the throttle sooner. So the gain loss there is like less than a tenth, right?
Sure.
Very minimal. But the places where I started to notice right away were these. So there's 3, and these are the 3 areas on the track. There's really 4, but we'll say 3 for like consistency's sake. This gap, rolling speed into turn 1, see my red, like having to overslow the entry to 1A.
Yep, absolutely.
Not committing to enough curb, not getting out of the brake soon enough. And he's braking a little later as well. So he carried more speed down the straightaway, rolled out of the brake sooner, rolled a little more speed through the corner. Here, we're actually pretty similar. He doesn't get to, I would say I actually got to power sooner than he did.
Yep.
He charged the entry a little bit here. Then we get a both good,
the net result on its way into, what is it, 2 or 3?
Yeah, I don't know what they call it.
You guys are basically in the same speed by the time you get there. So the gain loss, I'm guessing from the start finish to 1 is pretty substantial.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
so
a quarter second, 0.3.
0.3. So he's got 0.3 on me by the exit of 1B, and then I actually gain it back into 3. So I get the gap back down to like 0.2.
Yep.
Into the braking zone at 3.
Right.
Because
you got onto power there a little bit more than he did, right?
Yep, because I got a better exit out of 1B. Yeah, because I hope I got a better exit because I overslowed 1A.
What's amazing to me while I look at this is that for the first 1,500 feet, from let's say 250 feet to 1,500 feet, you didn't really lose any time. And then after you get to about 1,500, it just adds and it adds and it adds.
Yeah, that's where I probably spent most of my time on this page looking at our data. So if you're new to data, gain loss is like the time difference between 2 laps. So you have to have 2 laps selected to produce this graph. And in other software, it's sometimes called variance. So it's just showing you, the relative time difference and lets you pinpoint where those gaps happen on the track. So usually where the gain loss accumulates, it's a cumulative thing, right? It's not like isolated, it's like cumulative for the lap, but usually bumps in the gain loss are where you're going to see the biggest differences between 2 laps. It's really helpful to look at your own laps, particularly if you have 2 laps that are like really close in time. I guarantee if you go to gain loss, you'll see like 1 lap goes up like half a second.
Yep.
And then comes back down. And that's worth investigating.
Absolutely.
So in this particular case, actually the first third of the lap, if I had just rolled a little more speed into 1 there, which I was totally capable of doing, you'd
basically be dead even for the first 1,500 feet.
Yeah, we were close. Like, that is a normal gap that I see with myself. And that's like, right. I'm used to looking for tenths.
Sure.
Right. That's what that's the only gap that I ever have to anybody if someone's faster than me, it's tenths. It hasn't been seconds in years since I was running. Right. So here we go into 5 where actually we found I was a little better.
Right.
Point. So I go up. So he actually gets a little better run out of 3. We go up to a 0.33 difference. And then I gain a tenth back on him through the apex of 5.
Right.
But again, got to peel the onion back, right? I went faster through 5. Cool. I get to be like, whoa, I'm faster than Tom in 5. But it doesn't matter because he actually brakes way more efficiently because the car doesn't have as much energy in it. It's not as nervous. He goes to the brake and gets through 6 a lot better and puts another tenth and a half, 2 tenths almost on me through 6. Right. So originally I'm kind of looking at this like 6 is an opportunity, maybe, right? I go to the next lap. I slow a little differently for 5, and 6 is like identical to Tom's.
Sure.
There's only a couple places on the track where I never got close. And those were not turn 7, but see this gap in the gain loss here?
Yep.
We go from like 0.39 to 0.62. That's turn 8.
Okay.
He consistently had a higher minimum speed than me there. Usually like 3 or 4 miles per hour.
Jeez.
Yeah, just like every lap. So this is why I wanted to look at laps consistently, because if you look at 5 and 6, even 1, there's some laps where we're close, right? I'm 1 mile per hour slower instead of several. But in 8, he was faster every single time, which to me, that means opportunity. That's where I need to focus.
Absolutely.
Now, the really big one, the biggest one on the track, and this makes me so angry because I just don't understand it, right? Again, going into it, like I was talking about before, I'm going, it's going to be 5 and 15. I know that, right? Like I know that.
Yeah. I mean, you think you know.
I knew nothing.
But you have no idea.
I knew nothing. Yeah, absolutely. Those were the 2 places where I was the fastest. Like the 2 places where Tom would look at my data and learn something are those 2 places.
Sure.
Right. Here is 10. So we go from a gain loss of like 0.6 to 1 second. So I'm losing 4/10.
Yeah. 5.
10.
Yeah. That's a lot.
A second. And that's not even the exit, right? Because this is the exit. This is down the
And this is what hurts so much. I mean, this is almost, well, I mean, the duration basically is another like 6/10 right here, just in your acceleration zone on the way to 15.
Yep. And something I think that's important to mention. So you see, Abe, how the gain loss right here, it goes up, like he's beating me. If it's going up, Tom is going faster than me. If it goes down, I'm going faster than Tom. So, or my time, I'm not going faster. My time is improving over Tom's time.
Right.
Right. So as it goes up, he's gaining time over me. Now it peaks. And then for the next, couple hundred yards, I actually gain back about a couple hundred, like a half a tenth.
I think that's peculiar. I mean, it seems like then that implies that your exit of 10 is pretty decent, but it's clear then that he's doing deception better than you. And that's what's resetting that, or that's what's changing the slope of that line.
Yeah. So when I looked at it further, if we go back to the speed trace, right, this minimum speed difference is what killed me in 10. Right.
Yep.
We start braking almost at the same point. The difference is that he starts coming off the brake more than I do right here. I stay on it a little more. And our placement of the car is a little different. I turn in later. He starts turning the car in a little sooner, just like a tiny bit. We're talking, you can't see the difference in the video. Like when I watch the video, I'm like, this looks the same.
It looks the same.
Yeah. So he's turning in a little earlier and coming off the brake a little more, whereas I'm by necessity kind of trailing in deeper because I'm turning in deeper, but I end up overslowing by like a whopping 5 miles per hour.
Right.
Right. Which in a slow speed corner is a really, really big margin. So the reason you see that difference in the gain loss is because I go back to power before he does, because I've overslowed. And so that little bump of me gaining him is me going back to power. But because he's rolled more speed through the corner, even though I gain time back, this is kind of a hard concept. I gain time back over him because I accelerate harder before he does. The whole time he is at a higher speed. So then the gain loss starts to reset because he's actually, even though he got on the throttle later, he was going faster. Therefore, he never had to slow. He never slowed to the same speed that I did. He just maintained the speed. Mm-hmm. So that kind of goes back to like the prioritization of entry and exit, right? Slow in, fast out is only true to a point. If I had been 1 mile per hour slower than Tom and I got on the power when I did, you would see the gain loss look totally, I would probably eclipse him going to deception.
Sure.
Right. But I was so much slower that it didn't matter that I got on the power sooner.
Right.
Yeah. Then there's a gap in deception as well.
And that's a big one that costs a lot because you see those lines separated for quite a while on the track.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is a much smaller min speed difference. And the big difference here was that initially he was more aggressive with his turn in. But the biggest thing was that he went back to power sooner than I did on the exit. Mm-hmm. He didn't wait for the car to settle as much. The car was still kind of unsettled when he went back to power, whereas can
you zoom in really close on that? Because I want to see when the slope of the line really changes. Yeah, I mean, it looks like, probably 30 feet or so, where the blue line is starting to creep, or I guess it goes from concave down to concave up. This is a calculus lesson. Right at 2,700 feet for him versus you, much later than that, where you start accelerating again, which is, I mean, maybe it's 30 or 40 feet, but it adds up, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And the big difference there is we're both actually doing the same amount of a speed check to get the car to turn. But I allow my minimum speed to be later in the corner by not committing back to power because I'm still a little like, I just don't know if the car is going to take it, right? I'm ready to go back to power, but I'm not doing it.
Right.
Whereas he's like, boom, to the floor, I'll figure it out, right?
Yep.
And if you look at my race laps later in the weekend, I get closer to him here.
Sure.
Obviously, in the race, you just usually don't go as fast overall in qualifying, but that's another reason you want to look at. You don't want to ever isolate your data to just reviewing one or two laps. You kind of want to look at it a bigger picture because it's really easy like to kick myself. When I look at this one lap, I'm like, I am the worst driver ever in turn 10, ever. And then I look at the very next lap and my minimum speed is the same as Tom's, right?
Sure.
So it's like, yeah, you did that once though. It just happened to really hurt you on this particular lap. This was still my fastest lap. Let's see, I'm going to try to reset. I noticed that the screen share started not adjusting. All right. Everything's still looking good?
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, that big difference, and you can see our Vmax ends up actually being almost identical, right? It kind of neutralizes by the end of the straightaway, but where he really gains time over me is from Deception down the straightaway for the next couple hundred yards.
And maybe this is obvious to people who are watching. Even though the Vmax is the same, if you look at the gain loss, it's not, Vmax doesn't help you as much as really looking at the difference in average speed. From Deception all the way into 15, Tom's average speed is higher. His line is higher up than Andrew's, and because of that, he gains time for that entire duration.
Yep.
And in this case, it's basically what, 4/10?
Yeah, it's let's go to the exit of Deception, which is like right here. We go from being I'm 1 second slower to the before the braking zone for 15, 1.3.
Yep.
Right. So that's pretty significant. This initial part too, see this increase in the gain loss, that's really what he gains over me because of that exit. So again, it's just thinking about slow in, fast out, it's our max speed and actually the speed that we carry like through the last third of the straightaway is really close, and he's not pulling away from me much there. Right. But he is initially, and that's where you lose lap time. That's why like speed and time are two different things, right? It's higher average speed is better in most cases. But like I said before, even though my speed was slower, I accelerated harder and I actually improved my time over Tom at a 10 until that like result of his higher speed kind of caught up with us a couple of tenths of a second later. So yeah, that was pretty fascinating. So he did on this lap, he's quicker than me through 15, which is this fast. Let's see. Did the screen share freeze for you?
It did, yes.
Okay. Hold on a second.
It's kind of doing stuff.
Let me just reset. Sometimes if I back out of, I notice when it's tethered to when the app and the screen sharing thing are tethered. Have you ever been like, have Apple TV and you do the same thing we're doing right now. You like AirPlay your phone.
Yep.
It's like everything buffers, and the amount of like the data kind of just gets all wonky. There we go. Sometimes you just have to back out of it and go back into it when you're airplaying. Do a little AirPlay. So this is 15, and he gains time over me here as well. Not much, like it's pretty small, but at the minimum speed part of the corner, we're both at essentially the same speed. All right, this is kind of where you're going to apex. Let's go a little bit earlier. I think he was a little faster than me. Yeah. So he's, let's call it a mile per hour different minimum speed. Mm-hmm. But again, going into it, the preconceived notion, this is why you have to look at data, right? Like this is the whole reason, because going into it, I'm like, he's going to be so much faster than me there. And he really wasn't. Like very, very minimally. The gain loss here is a couple of tenths relative to how much he gains on me other places cumulatively on the lap. This is not a place of focus. So all of a sudden, after reviewing his data, I threw 15 and 5 out. I was like, I have that figured out, right?
Right.
Now I got to focus on these medium speed and slow speed corners, which is where I'm really losing time. Uh-huh. And the balance, I wasn't comfortable. The biggest thing that really hurt me on Friday was that we slapped a rear sway bar on the car and started with it pretty stiff to see what the difference was. And the car was pretty oversteer balanced.
Sure.
And learning a new track and on a slick for the first time in a couple of years made me really uncomfortable. So that was my biggest barrier for going faster. So actually we softened it, and Tom was the first one to drive with the softened sway bar. And then I went out and immediately felt better with less oversteer balance.
Right.
But that really shot me in the foot Friday. I think I would have been a lot faster Saturday had we started with the balance of the car being the same that I was used to, because I underestimated like the whole, again, tainted by NOLA. We went to NOLA. I learned the track in 3 laps, right? I'm like, this track's easy. This is not a big deal, right? Going to NCM, I did a whole day and I'm like, I'm still lost.
Yeah. So from here, I'm sorry for all those people who are listening to this episode, because it's a very visually focused show. I don't have the corner numbers mastered through this section, but if you go back to the speed versus distance trace, this is an area where there are a lot of bits that look very similar, but in terms of the gain loss from here until the start finish, there is a tremendous amount of time gap difference between you two.
Yeah. Again, you can see some real departure and like difference on the speed trace here at the end, which this is the S's going on to the front straightaway.
Yep.
But this part all looks the same, right? Like there's not a big gap here.
So what is that? The sinkhole is 4,250 feet ish.
Yep.
And the lines are basically on top of each other there, which says that like that is the limit of grip in that section. That's all there is. Mm-hmm. But as you start to go through the S's, there's a pretty big departure in your speeds at the particular positions.
That's the last. So the opportunity areas that I identified were, one, rolling speed through 1A, but I knew I could do that. So that wasn't really an area of focus. I was like, oh, I just didn't do that well on this lap. I found other laps where I did, not a big deal. The places where I was consistently slower were turn 8 minimum speed, turn 10, slowing all the way to the minimum speed is where I was losing time there, and still needing to get a good exit. And turn 10 and 12, 12, I just need to get on the power sooner. That was just an execution thing. My car placement and adjustment was right. So 8 and 10. And then the last one was the S's. That was the last place where I knew there's so much time to gain there, right? And it's not by being ballsier. It's not by being more committed. It's by being more technical.
Sure.
And by just kind of driving the track the way it kind of needs to be driven, driving the car at the limit of the tire for a little more, not giving up as much as I did. So as you kind of follow the speed trace here, this is through what they call 17. And our minimum speed again, and this is why I hear a lot of people talk about just looking at minimum speeds a lot of times when they look at data. So like, again, the difference between Tom and I is less than a mile per hour at the apex. Right.
But you did a lot more braking sooner and rolled off the brake pedal slower.
Right.
than he did.
Right. So our speed traces almost start to decrease at the same point. You know, I have a flatter speed trace going into it. He's accelerating. So I lost some opportunity there because I could have kept accelerating. But exactly, he comes out of the brake just a fraction. I guarantee you he's still trail braking, right? He's still coming out of the brake, helping the car rotate. I stayed on the brake a little more. And you know what's funny about that is that that's a pretty fast corner. 70 mile per hour minimum speed is high speed. You don't want to trail too much. I got some oversteer there significantly a couple of times, right? And when I reflect on it, it's not because I was carrying too much speed. It's because I had too much trail brake. I had too much weight on the nose, and I unloaded the rear, right? Whereas Tom was getting a flatter car, getting the car on all four tires and being really precise. So that's not a big time gap difference. We're talking like a tenth or two right there, maybe. But obviously somewhere I could work on. The reason I didn't focus on that is because, one, it was such a small time gap, but two, also I looked at other laps, and there are times when I beat his minimum speed. I didn't get as good of an exit, but I did 72 a couple of times there, which is too fast and compromises your exit. But then you already identified this, like through the sinkhole right here, he brakes a little later for the entry to the sinkhole. I roll out of the brake a little sooner. I actually have a little bit more speed going down into the sinkhole, and I actually don't slow as much going up out of the sinkhole.
But like, if I'm looking at these, I mean, we're pretty zoomed in on the speed distance trace, but like that, we're talking about minutia here. I mean, this is very, very similar data.
This whole section right here is and again, like you could flip flop our laps. Like you could look at another one of my laps and Tom's other lap, and the positions flip flop, right? Like this is really, really close. Where the difference happens, particularly in time, but you can, anytime you see a speed trace gap like this,
that's delta.
Yeah, you know there's a big time delta there.
Yep.
Right, and so it starts. This is where it all starts right here. I actually attack the exit of the sinkhole. Like as you're coming up out of the sinkhole, the car unloads. I carry too much speed there.
Sure.
Right? And so the car is a little oversteery, and I'm actually consistently fighting oversteer as the car unloads there and you're trying to turn, which necessitates this kind of like slowing moment that I have. So right here where Tom is maintaining a higher speed.
Yep.
I'm willing to bet. I'll have to look at my video again, but I'm pretty sure I'm like borderline oversteer. Tom's more composed because he didn't charge it as much. So he ends up carrying more speed at the apex here. Right. And he actually, so now I start accelerating, but I'm at 47 and he's at 53.
Right.
Right. I start accelerating harder. He waits longer and then gets on the gas. Yep. But the critical difference is that once he gets on the gas, he's on the floor basically from where you see the dot here, which is, if we go to the GPS position, Tom goes to power here. All right, it's actually a little bit further. He goes to power like right here. And then he never significantly comes back out of the throttle.
Yeah, if you look at the data, that part is impressive because, you know, I don't know. I mean, it basically looks like he's almost flat all the way from there to the start finish line, where having driven on that track before, like my car didn't do that.
Most don't. I never did that the entire weekend, and I gave up probably the better part of half a second here every lap because of it. And a lot of it. So see how he does right here on this. So this is a new, this is not a public version of the app right now. So this slider that I'm using to move the data around the track is actually not in the current App Store build as of today, which is April 29th. But you can see that he speed checks right here. You see how the divot in the speed trace happens right there?
Yep. Which is probably just like probably a lift.
That's probably a off it, back on it.
Yep.
If I had to guess, based on how quick his hands are there, he's probably either all the way off the gas or 50% back on it. And I did the same thing. I just did it for longer.
Sure.
Being less confident, not quite having the balance under me that I wanted, not knowing the nuance of the track, vision's not in there, all those little things, right? But the time gap is significant. So I find the most challenging corners. Again, going back to turn 5, there's no speed check in turn 5, really. You let off the throttle, you roll in as much speed as you can, look all the way down the track. It's a send it corner. For some reason, that was more natural for me.
The other thing that I'm looking at on screen here is coming out of the sinkhole. What I also see is positionally on the track. It looks like you're taking the long way around.
In the sinkhole right here?
Yeah, because you're very far on the outside of the track, and he stays tight, very tight, almost the entire time.
Remember how I mentioned I carried more speed into the sinkhole than he did?
Yep.
That's where I paid for it.
Sure. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. Had I kept it tighter on this lap and not charged it as much here, that would have been, even if I didn't get this part right that he gets right, that would have made up a significant difference, because this is a lot of distance right here.
Yeah, absolutely.
That I was traveling slower than he was. And that's where the big difference in that, if we go back to this page, that's where this happens right here.
Yep.
So I carry more speed into the sinkhole. Oh crap, too much speed. I gotta let it, I gotta kind of let the car slow down. Whereas he's in more control of the car. He gets the car up the hill with more speed, which makes a big difference. I think that's actually a really critical place on this track, that uphill entry into the sinkhole, because it's really easy to go too slow through there. You kind of have to be weird with the throttle to get it right. Like it's kind of weird. And then obviously this on the exit, he goes to power, little speed check right here, but that's again where we see like a big speed difference, like a 6-7 mile per hour speed difference, 7 miles per hour.
Well, I hate to end us short, but we are an hour and 11 minutes in, and I have things I got to do. I think that this is a natural stopping point for a data breakdown with Andrew, and perhaps tomorrow we can talk more specifically about Apex Pro hardware things. Does that sound good to you?
That sounds great to me. Yeah, there's a lot of exciting stuff happening with the rumored new Apex Pro unit, the worst kept secret in all of motorsports. So
that's I'd
love to talk about it.
All right. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm going to try and get this up today if we have time. And then we'll talk more about Apex Pro hardware tomorrow. So thank you for the data analysis. If you suffered through audio only, go back and check out the video, because there's a lot of really useful information here. And it's a really excellent demonstration of the capability of the Apex Pro software, which I am a very big fan of.
And we just scratched the surface of it too, Abe. We didn't look at the Apex lights, which there's some pretty significant differences when you look at Tom and I's data. The friction circle element, we didn't look at long G and lat G and decipher that. We didn't look at sector times. There's like a lot of layers that we could just keep going if we really wanted to.
Nerd stuff. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you so much for listening, everybody.
Thanks.